Hey, so last week we talked about food sensitivities, and I've got this cheat sheet floating around that helps you figure out what food you have a food sensitivity to. But today I want to go deeper and talk about what's really underlying your food sensitivity. You know, food sensitivities don't happen in a vacuum, and ultimately it's really not about the food. There's always something underneath that. So let me say that again. Ultimately, it's not about the food. There's always something underlying that. Okay, so what does that mean? Let's use gluten for the example because that's a pretty big food sensitivity these days. So I've got a rash, and I think it's a food sensitivity. And so I finally figure out that it's gluten, right? After months of frustration and trying to narrow it down, it's not easy to figure out the food sensitivity. And a lot of that is because it's really about what's underlying it. So, after all those months of guesswork and frustration, I hone in on the gluten, I stop eating the gluten, and I realize my rash is mostly good. It's mostly gone, right? So problem solved, gluten, I'm done. But really, there's something deeper underneath, something that's irritating and upsetting your system that makes gluten even an issue for you, right? You ought to be able to eat gluten, you know, once in a while and not have a rash. You know, I'm not saying that gluten is a health food, so don't get me wrong on that, but you shouldn't have to be it's insanely strict to not get a rash, right? So what's really going on? Something is irritating the lining of your digestive tract, right? It's making it swollen and inflamed and red and irritated, right? Like an infection on the skin. It's the same kind of thing. And once your body gets gluten in, it just totally freaks out. It's already living on the edge. It's already upset and irritated. Can't handle one more stressor. Gluten tips it over the edge. And then now you've got your intestines are just flipping out, right? So what goes on is like you just can't digest the gluten because your intestines hands are full, let's say, right? So they're swelling. It could happen like this. They're swelling, and so that creates little gaps in the lining of your gut. And now this gluten that you can't really digest because your body's so busy dealing with something else, these molecules aren't completely broken down, and they start escaping through those little swollen gaps that are made. Now you have these big molecules that should be little tiny like carbohydrate molecules, but they're these big molecules, or even a protein. Gluten's really a protein, floating around in your bloodstream where they don't belong. And so you have your lymphatics are trying to like clean that out. And so they're trying to push those huge molecules out through your skin. Now you've got a rash, right? So really it's about what's going on underneath that sensitivity. So you figured out gluten's the problem, you stopped eating it, but you haven't done anything to calm down that inflammation, that irritation in your gut, right? Which is really what's underlying the whole thing. It's kind of like you've stopped putting gas on the fire, but the fire's still there and burning. And we need to figure out what's causing the fire, right? What's causing the swelling? What's giving you that gut problem in the first place? And a lot of us might not even feel like we have a gut problem, right? Because all we see is a rash. So we're not associating that with an issue with our gut at all. But there's probably some subtle signs that your digestion is not like optimal and completely healthy, like gas or bloating or heartburn or diarrhea or constipation, things like that, right? So the rub is without addressing the underlying issue, you're going to end up with more food sensitivities, right? The rash might come back after time, or maybe you'll get a different symptom. So now you have to go through that whole process again and figure out, oh my gosh, it's dairy this time, or corn or something. So now you've stopped eating gluten, and now you stop eating corn, and corn is usually the replacement for gluten and all the gluten-free things. So it's just like you get more restrictive, making things harder and harder for yourself. Because really, cutting out the foods is just the Band-Aid. You've got to get to the bottom of the symptom, which is the inflammation and the irritation. Common culprits underlying those things are like funguses, molds and yeast like Candida, or parasites, or chemicals like glyphosate coming from like all the GMO foods and wheat. Bad bacteria is overrunning your good bacteria, right? People are talking about SIBO, S-I-B-O, meaning small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, right? That's just the bad bacteria is like taken over for the good bacteria, which are the probiotics. Leaky gut, which is kind of what we just described. Gut health just in general, right? Have you ever heard it all starts in your gut? Well, it's true, like that headache, the sinus infection, the rash, the cold you had last week, lung issues, you know, all of that stuff and so much more. It all starts in the gut. So really all of us can use some serious support getting our guts healthy, because there's really not too many of us that really have a healthy gut. Hey, Amber. Amber's just asking me what probiotic do I recommend. I have a couple that I like to work with. I like the SBO probiotic from Dr. Axe. I also like the advanced probiotic from Purium. But really, if you go to any health food store, you can get a good probiotic. Just don't go to like Walmart or Rite Aid or something like that. And pretty much any probiotic you get from like a health food store is going to be a good quality. And it doesn't necessarily have to be refrigerated anymore either. So I'm digressing into probiotics, but excellent question, Amber. I'm glad that you asked that. And so all those little things that I just talked about that you can get, you know, that cause the gut problem, that can be really underlying your food sensitivity. I'm going to break these down this week. We'll just go day by day on each one of these topics. So just stay tuned. I'll do it in a post, or maybe I'll do more lives, but I'll just kind of break down those different things and how they can be impacting your gut and giving you the issue that just makes it so that you're sensitive to gluten when you really don't need to be. Okay, so if you want to find out what's behind your food sensitivities, I'd love to help you figure it out and find out what's really going on in your body. Click the link up above or maybe below to get a bioscan from me, and we can figure out what's really stressing your gut out. And I just want to thank you for taking the time and being here with me today. Till next time.